She's
Oh,
sharing.
sorry, Vice Chair Davis, would you like me to start?
Yes, let's start, and we are going to, is that okay if we work the two of you in? We don't have you listed here, we're going to get you listed right now. Go ahead.
Yes.
Deputy Superintendent
Thank you.
Stallings.
Thank you, board members. It's so wonderful to see you here today. We are on agenda item 9.2, which is where we're going to be talking about the legislative request for statutory changes. So we've got two for you today, and I believe that Jeff is going to start. And just as a reminder, we're getting ready for the 2022 legislative session. I believe the next item will be Assistant Superintendent Jacobson and Del Frost will be talking about the process on business cases as well. So there are those two separate items. But the first item is the expansion of the Farm to Fork program. And just as a clarification for this request, USBE already has resources and a staff person. Actually, Jeff, why don't you go ahead and speak to it? Sorry.
Sure. Jeff Van Holten, Director of Public Affairs for the State Board of Education. Glad to be here today. So some of you may recall we passed a while ago R277-727, which allowed the Child Nutrition Program to take some of the liquor tax money that they receive and use it for additional reimbursement incentives to incentivize innovative ways to enhance child nutrition programs in different schools. One of those ways is to provide an additional incentive for farm to fork, so encouraging schools to buy local food from local farmers and putting that into the lunchroom. So this is kind of in tandem with that. So we have the Farm to Fork program. With that rule passage, the Child Nutrition Program set aside $250,000 to start those grant programs for this upcoming school year. And this piece of legislation was a piece of legislation that has been requested by a legislator. They would like our staff to be involved. So the bill file is already open. There's already discussions. And the reason we're bringing this forward to you today is we would like our staff to be at the table and involved at the request of the legislator, and we wanted to make sure that we had the support of the board. The bill that is going to be created is actually not going to create new employees for the state board. It's actually going to create a task force regarding Farm to Fork program. As you can imagine, we can't coordinate that alone. And so we need to coordinate with sister agencies that have a hand in the pie of agriculture and food distribution. And so the idea of the bill is to create a task force and to assign the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health to also have a farm to fork FTE or individual, whether that's assigned to somebody who's already there or it's additional, and then coordinate with the child nutrition program. So this would benefit us by increasing our capacity without increasing our current FTE count. So that is the essence of the bill. Representative Handy has already opened the bill file and has requested that we participate in the drafting. And so that is why this is before you today, so we can make sure that we have your support in doing that. And happy to answer questions. We also have staff in the back. I believe Kate Wheeler and Kathleen Burton are both here to answer any specific questions as well.
Super, thank you. Board Member Klein?
Oh, no, that's Jeff. That's,
Jeff is Natalie?
well, for some reason, Jenny and Natalie are both registered on those from before. And so the top one is down there.
So I'm going to have to watch for your lights, I guess. So raise your, I see yours. I see yours. Okay, Board Member Hutchings?
Sorry.
No, hers is the one down there. Mine's not down there. Mine's not even on.
Oh, yeah, hers is down there.
Excellent. Board Member Earl?
Okay, so is it all right if I ask a couple questions? What are the barriers? What's happening? Why are we not? Do you know what I'm saying? Is this just not successful because we already have modalities in place and habits? Or do we know what the barriers are? Is that the point of the task force?
I think it would be best to have Kate Wheeler come up and answer that, if that's all right, Chair.
Yes, please.
Hi, Kate Wheeler, Child Nutrition Specialist with USBE. So a lot of the barriers we're experiencing right now are on the agricultural side. A lot of the barriers with schools I'm able to work on and work on those. But a lot of them relate to production and distribution and food processing. And we have farmers who are interested in selling to schools and schools who are interested in buying from those farmers. What we don't have is staff to support the farmers in making the changes they need to make to be able to sell to those schools. And that is pretty far outside of like what I do, right?
Yeah.
So it'd be really helpful to have somebody at Department of Ag who had time to do those things.
So when you say that, you mean they're making the connections and the financial contracts, that kind of thing, in order for it to, am I understanding that right?
Well, one of the things in Utah that's actually really great is we have a lot of really small family farms. We don't have a huge industrial agriculture. But so making that leap to institutional sales versus individual sales does require some changes in their distribution structure and then the way schools currently receive food. A lot of times they need a minimal amount of pre-processing, and our farms don't have the capability to do that now. And so it's like really having that technical assistance and on-farm support to get them their food safety certifications, to up their processing capabilities, to train them in how to market and sell to schools. These are all really key pieces of that farm to school puzzle that, again, are just like, that would be a different job than the job I'm doing.
Okay, so you're thinking we'll get whole milk, right, to schools, is that what?
That,
The
unfortunately, is
unpasteurized,
federal.
the good stuff? Is that what the,
That's at the federal level.
okay, all right. Anyways, okay, I was just trying to understand why if it's not working, why are we pursuing it? And if it's workable, what's the barriers? So, thanks.
Yeah, we've done a lot of the relationship building, but now we just need people who have the time to spend in it. And I can speak to that. When I started in this role, I didn't have very much time, and we've been able to carve that out. And Kathleen's been a big supporter, and it's made a huge difference in the amount that I can invest in training our schools. But now UDAP and UDH are kind of in that same boat where I was 2 to 3 years ago.
So FYI, I do have zucchini if you're in need.
Everyone has zucchini.
Take mine, take mine. Thank you, Board Member Hanson.
I was just wondering if cost is one of the big barriers, or if the local producers are able to provide produce at cost effective levels, or if we're talking about subsidies being put in place. I don't know if you like that word or not, but how are we working the cost end of things?
So that's part of that incentive program that Jeff mentioned that we've allocated actually $250,000 to this next year. And so schools that buy local are going to be eligible for a reimbursement from us through our liquor tax funds, so that they can still pay those farmers market value, because we don't want farmers cutting their prices to be able to sell to schools, because that's just moving the problem of food security around, right? If you're making it tough for small farms to make a profit, that's not our goal.
Thank you. Let's move on to number 2. Oh, sorry, Vice Chair Belknap.
Do we have any issues where we might have lawsuits for if a child gets sick or something? What kind of protections do we have for the schools in that case?
So we would have the same food safety protocols apply to produce purchased from a Utah farm as it would apply to any other food that they're bringing into the school.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you for your help. Seeing no other questions, let's move into the next one.
And Jeff, could you show this document? Do you see which one I'm showing, though? This one. Thank you. So the second one is related to a piece of legislation from last session. It was SB 219, and you may remember that bill provided a truancy or a moratorium on truancy for 2 school years, really the end of the 2020-21 school year, and then now it's a moratorium for the 21-22 school year. It decriminalizes truancy, but really what it does is it prohibits LEAs from providing notices of compulsory education, notices of truancy, and also you'll remember we talked about the term penalizing students or taking I apologize, I'm trying to remember I just had the rule up. Punitive action, thank you. I knew Jeff. Punitive action against students for a year and a half. LEAs have reached out to our staff and stated that this is been very problematic for them as they've been trying to provide incentives and supports to students who are truant or are not attending school. And so they have asked that we request the legislature to change the deadline of the moratorium. Currently, it's through June 1 of 2022, and they would like that date to be pulled back to as soon as possible. So that is the summary of the second proposal.
Thank you. Board Member Earl?
Can I ask a question? Okay. I guess I have a couple of questions because some districts are saying they don't need this and other districts are saying we want this, right? Because some have put in some mechanisms that they're able to avoid this. They've got processes in place that are very efficient and effective. And they're finding also that it really does not necessarily, the end result is not always good for kids. So anyway, but I guess, what was my question? I should have wrote it down. So, oh my goodness. Okay, so are we getting to, I'm wondering, where there's a lot of uncertainty currently going into this next year, if we're careful not to get too ahead of ourselves. Does that make sense? If we are talking about a classroom of 30 kids and do you know what I'm saying? This whole idea that we may be uncertain what's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 months. This is looking into January, or we're looking at it sooner? I guess that was my question. That was really, sorry.
Thank you. Vice Chair Davis, okay.
Please.
So right now, we're not unaware of any special sessions before the January. Next general session will be in January. Sometimes they'll pass bills that have an immediate effective date. It could take effect during the general session. Often bills don't take effect till after. Now, obviously, this one, by that point, if a change hasn't been made by March of 2022, I don't know how much is going to change the school's practice at that point. They'll have been 6 years, or 6 years, 6 months. It might seem like 6 years in COVID time, 6 months of the school year. But you're right. I think some schools and districts have seen this impact their students more than maybe other schools or districts have. But Tanya Albornoz is the specialist, or actually I believe she's a coordinator, who might be able to answer more questions about some of the specific examples. But I remember personally listening to the testimony about this bill during the session, and it was billed as something to protect families who were engaging in homeschooling for the first time, so that somehow they wouldn't be caught up and have these notices come against them for in their best efforts of trying something new during a pandemic of homeschooling, that they wouldn't be caught up and somehow legally charged. And I don't think that that's what school districts and charter schools are concerned with. It's really not, they're not worried about trying to identify or do anything with respect to homeschooling families. It's more about students who are enrolled in school and students maybe aren't engaged and aren't attending. But I don't know if Tanya, if you're available and you want to answer anything, but do you have additional questions beyond that?
No, Tanya?
Looked like Board Member Earl said she didn't have
No more
additional-
questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Board Member Hutchings?
Yeah, thank you. I actually, I don't have a question, but I just wanted to give a shout out to USBE. I'm in favor of rolling this back because some of the more traditional ways we've dealt with truancy, we need to kind of learn our way out of. And I think we need some time to do that. But earlier this summer, USBE did provide a 2-day-long virtual training on attendance and absenteeism with promoting and teaching us how to use more of a positive behavioral approach that was actually really exciting. So frankly, either way this goes, USBE has made sure that school leaders have been trained and have tools ready to help students engage in school. So I wanted to shout that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Board Member Lear?
I had a short question and then I had a comment. My question is it USBA that's asking for this specifically, Angie, or is it more just anecdotally from is it more just anecdotally from various LEAs?
Tanya Albernos, coordinator for prevention and student services. We've had multiple superintendents approach us from all over the state, including the Superintendents Association has asked us to come and present to them on the issues and help them to understand why students aren't attending school. And so this was something that we discussed with them. And so, yeah, it's widespread.
Thanks, but we don't have a specific request from USSA, but not USBA specifically.
Not that I know of, no.
Okay, and my comment is just that in my day job, I've heard from a number of LEAs who have not only expressed concern that this is counterintuitive, we're trying to engage students and yet we're told we can't, we're not sure what punitive action means or we're not sure exactly what those phrases mean. And so they felt like they're concerned about their actions might be perceived that way. And so at least they're looking for clarity and in the kind of a solving or addressing the counterintuitive sort of sense of this. So I completely support this so that and I've often said I'm an old school educator. I believe if you can't get kids there, you can't teach them. And if you don't have all kinds of things at your disposal to get them there, nobody's looking at criminalizing behavior. I don't think it's just looking for ways that are clear for LEAs to get students and their parents to pay attention to the need to come to school. So I really support addressing this problem. Maybe it turns into a local control kind of a situation that is not just a statewide, mandate of you can't do this, that maybe an LEA has to have a plan that is approved. So that's something I would be in favor of, but just this idea that you can't do these things and we're not really clear what the phrases mean is really a problem. Thanks.
Yes, Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
Thank you. Board Member Lear, I just wanted to let you know that in June, the Finance Committee and then the full board on June 22nd passed a version of R277607, which does define punitive action. It includes a notice of truancy, a notice of compulsory ed, and does not mean any other supports or alternative interventions is determined by LEA. So I didn't know if maybe you wanted to let those who've been reaching out to you about the broadness of punitive action. Hopefully that's helpful.
I did remember that. That was in the back of my mind. But, sorry if I was just gonna, but I still think making it more clear and maybe our interaction with the legislature would be a good thing on this issue. I rarely think. I had to add that part.
One last question from Board Member Earl.
Yeah, just as they were talking about punitive actions, and I guess this probably isn't built into the law at all, like a financial punitive action for being, I guess that would be a local decision. Am I accurate in saying that? For example, like so many tardies or so many absences, you have to pay an amount. That's based on local decision. We're not making that decision here. Is that accurate? But that could be a punitive measure, right? I don't know if
Yes.
that's effective measures, but other than mom or dad's not real happy, but.
For purposes of SB 219, though, and the rule, that would not be included in what it's saying with punitive actions. The issue of charging, though, that is a fee, a school fee. I don't want to turn this into a school fee issue, but, so I don't know that that's specifically defined as a punitive action, but you are correct that those policies of if you're going to charge for somebody for being tardy or, those are local policies and not governed by our rules.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, do you have information for us on the next item of 2022 general session request for statutory changes?
So there's just those two items above, the two that we talked about. So the number one's the Farm to Fork program, and then the second one is requesting that the June 1, 2022 date be moved back related to SB 219. So those are the only two that we've asked for you to consider today.
Great, thank you. I'll entertain motions. if there are any. Board Member Lear?
I move that the board support these two requests for statutory changes that have come before us from the staff.
Okay. Okay. Do you mind if I read it?
No, read it however you want. I didn't read it from the,
Okay, we have a motion on the floor that the board directs staff to work with legislators on potential amendments to Utah Code as proposed. Those in favor? Molly seconded. Those opposed? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Deborah Jacobson and Dale Frost. It was quiet. It's fine. When you come up, will you introduce yourselves, including your official titles?
Sure. So Deborah Jacobson, Assistant Superintendent of Operations.
Dale Frost, Fiscal Policy Analyst.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Go ahead.
So we're excited to be here, obviously, and it's kind of hard to believe that I'm about to say this, but it's time for FY22 session. So it's time to get started on that. Today, we kind of want to spend some time on, as staff have already kind of started some of this process in preparing for the formal process for you as the board, the actual budget or the business case, making requests to the legislature. So there's some very tight timelines in this. We wanted to give an overview for new board members especially, and of course a reminder for our board members that have done this for a few times. So I'm going to turn the time over to Dale to go over the details, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members. It's really fun to be with you in person. It's kind of the first time for some of you. Again, I'm Dale Frost, the Fiscal Policy Analyst. A couple of my duties, I manage the fiscal note process, trying to estimate what bills cost, and then the business case process. I look forward to working with you all. I have a lot to cover, and I'll try to go quickly so that there's time for questions. And feel free to ask those at the end or during. Okay. Whichever you prefer. So I'll quickly go over give an overview of the budget process, and then what the impacts of the legislation that was connected to Constitutional Amendment G and how that impacts your business cases and considerations, and then a few things to think about as you begin to evaluate business cases. And then we have 2 requests for you as board members. So going over the budget process, it's helpful for me to think about what are kind of the final products that come out that we help to inform. The first balanced budget is actually a budget recommendation that comes out of the governor's office. And then the final budget that we have to comply to is the legislative budget. The executive budget informs the legislative budget, and both of these are kind of the pillars of the process that we work towards, and they are both balanced budgets that have to balance revenues with expenditures. We at the board inform these budgets, but we do not create our own budget. There are really 3 related but distinct processes that go into the budget process. It's really what are our needs, that we call the budget formulation process. Then there's a revenue projections process, and we're lucky here in the state that that's a consensus process. I've worked in other states where that's not a consensus between the governor and the legislature and others. And so luckily we have one number that we peg to, and then there's a budget prioritization process, and we inform that through your priorities, and the legislature eventually prioritizes what budget items get funded and at what level. So I thought it might be helpful to kind of walk you through the calendar and when these things really occur. It's really a 9-month calendar. unless something goes awry and we have to, a pandemic hits or something like that, and we have to have multiple sessions to go back and change it. But July through March is where most of the action on budgets come. And in December, the executive budget comes out. In March, that's the legislative budget. So this first part, the budget formulation process, we are identifying needs throughout, but really the time for BUSBE to engage on identifying the needs has already started, and it will go through October. Things will come up after the fact, but we're hoping that we can identify most of the needs by that time so we can inform the governor. And that process for the governor goes from September through December when that budget comes out. And legislators are already talking and thinking about this, but it really gets started in November, going into EAC, which is the Executive Appropriations Committee, in December, and then gets going in earnest in January and February. So there are two key dates when it comes to revenue projections. For the EAC meeting in December, the initial estimates come out. So if you have a question on how much do we have to spend, we really don't know that answer until December, and that's going to change again in February. And so it's a challenge to always know exactly how much we have to spend. We have to kind of figure out what our needs are well before that process. And then the budget prioritization process, USBE, we're engaging with the governor and the legislature on this throughout that process. And we hope to begin in September, give you the business cases to start to look at, and then in October, that process can really begin in earnest. So I wanted to go through an analogy. So this is my wife, Michelle's old car. It was a 2008 Jetta. She paid for it on her teacher's salary and paid it off and was very proud about that and loved that car. We got married, and I have two kids from a previous marriage, and then we had a kiddo last year. And so putting those three kids in the back of that little Jetta is not very fun. And, I'm kind of frugal. Other people would say cheap, and they're like, no, we're not getting a new car until it really got unbearable. And so think about the budget formulation process. When we were talking about what is our budget priority for 2021, my wife said, we need a bigger vehicle. We need something so the kids don't fight and that we have capacity to grow. We didn't know at that time, could we afford a nice minivan or could we only afford a clunker? So kind of like we don't know what we can spend on, but we did know we need, so what is the need? We need a larger vehicle. So we set a goal and started saving throughout this year, and then we didn't expect this, but my parents actually sold us their Chrysler Town and Country for $1 in April. And that saved us a lot of money, and it's been a wonderful thing. I have to remind myself because we just repaired that vehicle for $1,500 yesterday. But it cost us $1, and it works really well, and we're very happy about that. And so we're able to redirect some of those funds to other budget priorities. So why do I bring this up? Well, when we're talking about the budget formulation process and what are our needs, it's important to not, and as a numbers guy, it's kind of weird to say this, let's not get too focused on the numbers. What are our needs and what are the hierarchy or priority of these needs? And so we're recommending that, the budget tracker that we bring to you in September and October, that the business cases will have all the numbers and all the specifics, but that won't be the focus of the budget tracker in September and October, and so we can really focus on the summary of the business cases and how they align with your priorities, and then from that period on, we can go and show you all the numbers after that. I don't know, is there anything more to add on that, Deborah? No? So yeah, the point we want to make was early in the budget process, try to focus on identifying needs and prioritizing issues rather than on specific dollar amounts, because those amounts will change based on available revenues, based on new information. But what the governor and the legislature really want to know is, if we had to prioritize this need over that need, which one would you, as the governing body for public education, prioritize? So that's the process overview. Any questions at this point? I'm going to quickly go through this next section because I know there's a lot left. On Constitutional Amendment G that passed last November, it broadens what can be used for the education fund. Connected to it was House Bill 357. And I'm not going to go through all of the bits and pieces of that, but what's important for your budget process is that there's now in statute an automatic adjustment for inflation and for enrollment growth. And I'll show you what that means. This was the budget tracker from last year, and it's kind of hard to read, but that first item was the WPU value increase, and the recommendation was a 4% WPU value increase. In December, due to Constitutional Amendment G, a 1.8% was already built into the budget. And we don't know exactly what that will be, but I would imagine it's somewhere similar to that. So the point here is if you want a WPU value increase, we could already bank on that piece. And so it would most likely be a business case that would be the difference between that and whatever you'd want to prioritize. On enrollment growth, that was completely funded, and we expect that to continue, and that's required by statute. So these kind of top-level issues are already kind of taken care of, and so that makes our lives and work a little bit easier. Any questions on that?
Board Member Cannon?
Yeah, so I'm showing my age here, but I remember for years and years, it was, I believe in statute, that the Utah State Board of Education formulated a budget based on the needs of public education. That was done first, and then the governor did his budget, and then the legislature was the final stopping point. So are you telling me that now we no longer formulate a budget? I thought I heard you say that earlier. So I'm just needing clarification.
No, you do still need to formulate a budget. It's just in these early stages, we're trying to identify what the true issues are in education as a whole first and address the money second, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, thank you. I just was a little foggy on where we were going with that. I didn't know if that was changed in Amendment G and I didn't catch it or what happened.
And Member Kennedy, if I may, the budget process hasn't changed.
Okay.
The board continues to inform both the governor's budget and the legislature's budget.
Oh, thank you for clarifying.
So there are three key considerations, and we, starting in September, want to bring you information so that you can think about these different facets as you are evaluating business cases. The first is, does a business case align with the metric of the USBE strategic plan? We want to stay focused on the plan, and we want to fund the plan. But we can't ignore that COVID-19 is still out there, and the impacts of COVID-19 and other high priority needs exist. And so how do we balance those? And so the superintendency is going to go through a process to really identify those current needs and highlight those for you as you figure out how to prioritize business cases. And then we all know that a large amount of funding through ESSER ARP is coming to schools. So we're going to be trying to answer this question of, are there any costs within business cases that can be covered with federal funds? Those are three considerations. I just want to quickly go through and how this will play out. So in the 2020 session, this was our tracker here. We identified in that first column there, after the summary, which business cases align to a strategic plan metric. When we went to the legislature, we identified which goal of the strategic plan is supported by each of the business cases. This was not done for last year, because last year it was all COVID all the time. I mean, we had such pressing needs that we had to focus on those issues. And so that's kind of what really was the lens last year. And now we're trying to balance these two things. I kind of want to give you an example of kind of how this could play out. So this is a screenshot from the ARP ESSER plan, which has some of the top priorities. And I'm just going to highlight one of those, addressing literacy in grades K-12. Well, how does that align to the metrics of the strategic plan? Well, we know that there are direct metrics in early literacy. We also know that there are system-wide metrics. But we know that literacy is key to the other goals, health, safe and healthy schools, personalized learning, but the connection is not so direct there. And what we don't want to do is focus so much on one that we lose the other. And how can we balance the needs? And that's the difficult job of budgeting and prioritizing. So what we're thinking of doing is providing a box where we say it is addressing a current need or it's aligned to the strategic plan, and then in the business case, articulating in more detail how and why. And then on the federal fund side, we're going to be going through kind of this process. As you know, federal funds, especially ESSER ARP, there are some broad use cases, but it's still restricted in use. And so we can use ARP funds for certain things and not others, but the timing of the funds is also important. That even if it's a slam dunk part of an allowable use case, but it's really an ongoing recurring cost, it may not be appropriate for federal funds long term. And so that's kind of what we're trying to figure out, what fits best with federal funds or state funds. And so we'll provide some information on that going forward. And so we'll have kind of in our tracker some of that information, and then if you want to drill down, you'll go to the business cases to find more specific information. And so here are two requests for board members. We would really like you all and facilitate a way for you to communicate with USBE staff regarding your top budget priorities. You may not have a specific thing in mind, but you may have a program about which you really want to see additional funds. And so how do we do that? Well, often there's communication with staff at all levels with board members, and that can lead to mixed messages and signals getting crossed. And so what we're suggesting is that if you have some ideas on budgets, or you just kind of want to find out what are staff thinking in this area or that you reach out to me, and I will connect you with the program staff, the correct person, the superintendency and the director, and then you can have that conversation just so that we all know what those conversations are. A staff member might tell you, we're not asking for a business case for these reasons, and then you can determine how to move forward from there. We're not trying to guide or dictate the process. We're just trying to make sure that we all understand what the conversations are. So, and I know that's maybe a little different than how we've operated in the past, but what we've had in the past is sometimes, questions that could be answered much earlier that are being answered in October, December, or even later. And so we're trying to avoid that. And then the second request is to ask the board that you prioritize maybe 5 to 10 business cases by your October board meeting. And that's so that you can engage with the governor and his processes, and so they know what your priorities would be, and those can be reflected in the executive budget. And so that's kind of hopefully it gives you kind of a sense of where we're going, why we're doing that. In September, you'll start to see these business cases come in, and we're hoping by October you can start to prioritize. But that doesn't mean that can't change throughout the process, and it's going to be updated throughout. And as we learn and get more information, and be happy to answer any questions.
Seeing none?
Yes.
Board Member Hanson? Seeing Board Member Hanson?
Thank you for seeing me. I appreciate it. And sorry for the messed up system. It is good to be seen. I think we're in a unique year this year because there's been a lot of spending going on that's kind of been not as controlled by the board as it has been in the past. A lot of money flowing to LEAs and projects being done. And I may just not be looking in the right place, but I don't have a lot of visibility as to what the money that's gone out has been spent for. I'm wondering if there are some successes in some areas or some really good projects that have taken place that we might want to replicate and do other things. Is there a mechanism for us to get an idea of what's been going on for the last year with the money that's gone out, and so that maybe we can look for those success cases, and those might build business cases for us, I think.
I think we can definitely probably pull a lot of that. I know that most of our program staff could probably start just listing things off as we go. It's a lot of the discussions that we have while we're talking about business cases, and there have been a lot of discussions all along as we've been going. And I'm sure that we can probably flesh some of that out.
That would be helpful for me at least, and I don't want to create a project just for one board member, but I think it might help us to maybe direct our thoughts in, certain directions. We had a discussion this morning about HVAC systems, and, that may be an area that we want to make sure flows out across the state instead of just in isolated pockets, just as an example. There are probably some other things like that, but.
We're also trying with the business cases to make sure that they're very data-driven, so that it has that information behind it to demonstrate where the wins are.
Okay. Well, thank you. That would be a request, I guess, to staff from me.
Thank you. Thank you, Assistant Superintendent of Operations Jacobson and Fiscal Policy Analyst Frost. And I will say, Dale, that my 13-year-old daughter just yesterday shattered my minivan windshield. So I feel your minivan repair pain, but we appreciate you sharing that information with us today.